is Representative Steve King, a Republican from Iowa. He is on the House Judiciary Committee and the chairman of the Conservative Opportunity Society. Congressman, always a pleasure to have you on New Day, sir.
My pleasure. Good morning, Chris.
All right, so you in the past have had trouble when you were characterizing your position on immigrant, when you were made your cantaloupe calves comments. Would your advice to Donald Trump be to not couch his feelings about border security in painting Mexican immigrants in the ugliest way?
Well, I would say to Donald Trump, I appreciate the scrappiness of him when he's attacked by other people. He counterattacks and plunges forward, and he delivers more facts to support the statement that he's made. Now, it'd be nice if we could always talk nice about these things and couch these things in terms, but I've done that a lot, but I never get quoted, Chris. So sometimes you have to say it real plain so people understand it. You know, I heard that Donald Trump just on Saturday night here in Iowa make a statement that he pointed out about how many of these kids that are coming into the United States illegally from Central America are sexually violated and raped. He said 80%. I've been down to the border and checked across these places. The number I come back with is 75% are sexually abused on the way to the United States. So I'd say in Donald Trump's defense, somebody's doing that to these kids that are being raped and abused, and when they're coming across Mexico, it's a reasonable assumption to conclude the people doing that are Mexicans.
Right, but, you know, playing with facts, you can make them say what you want. You know the net immigration right now from Mexico is almost zero because many are going back because the economic opportunities haven't been what they were in the past. And saying that someone is raped on their way immigrating to America is different than saying they are a rapist. You get the distinction. And saying that you care about border security is one thing. Saying that the people who come across this border are rapists, druggies, and criminals is not just statistically untrue, but just unfair on some level. Don't you agree with that?
Well, I think what happens is that it gets distorted perhaps a little bit on both sides of this.
No, but that's what he said, Congressman. And then when he was given a chance to, you know, hey, do you want to say something else? Do you want to take back what you just said about calling most Mexican immigrants these things? He said, no, I'm 100% right.
But, Chris, he didn't say most Mexicans were rapists. He said they are. He's speaking generally, speaking of the criminals that are doing this. And I'd go back to this point. I mean, I have go down there. I talk to the people that are working with these children that are coming across. I've walked through these transit places where we've built buildings down there to house them. And I ask the workers that are working with them, what percentage are abused? What percentage are raped? They tell me 75%. Donald Trump says his numbers are 80. That's not very far apart. So somebody is doing that. You can't be a rape victim without having a rapist.
I know, but you're making an assumption that it's other immigrants who are violating these people on the way through here, and I just think that it's a little bit misleading. And you know that immigrants are 5 times less likely to be in prison than native people here. So to say that they're mostly criminals...
Well, I don't know about that. That would surprise me when 30% of our prison population are criminal aliens.
Or that there are people who are in jail for being illegal immigrants here as opposed to what they did here and committing crimes. Let's change topics, though, because there's another hot topic for you. Gay marriage. The Supreme Court made its ruling that this is an extension of equal protection. The right exists. You disagree because?
I'm flabbergasted that the court could come to that conclusion. By the way, I've got some history in this. The Iowa Supreme Court came with a similar conclusion back in 2009. We voted 3 of the justices off the state Supreme Court for that reason. But for them to cite the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment, Chris, that amendment was ratified in 1868. For the Supreme Court to take the position that somehow the people that voted to ratify the Constitution or ratify the 14th Amendment in 1868 were planning that we would somehow come to the realization that they'd written same-sex marriage rights into that. I will say no one who voted to ratify that 14th Amendment gave that a thought, or if they happened to give it a thought, which is very unlikely, they weren't thinking that they were writing language in there that would do such a thing.
Well, you could say the same thing about race
on the part of the court.
You could say the same thing about race and anti-miscegenation laws. They were unpopular. People voted to keep blacks and whites from marrying together, and eventually the court found that no, they count as people, obviously, with equal rights under the Constitution.
You could say that about race, Chris, but we had the Dred Scott decision, and the people at the same time in 1860 ratified the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment to end slavery and make sure there was equal rights for people, all God's children who had immutable characteristics, not self-proclaimed characteristics, but immutable characteristics. And that's the distinction here.
Well, it's a distinction to you,
look at what's going
Congressman.
on here, you cannot compare the two things.
Oh, so of course you can. Yes, of course you can. They're both people. Gay people are people. Well, brown people are people. You're saying that being gay is not an immutable human characteristic, and race is, right? That's what you're saying.
That's correct. That's correct. And once you cross that line, and there are no immutable nothing but immutable characteristics and constitutionally defined protection in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that is when you cross that line, you get into hate crimes, you get into self-proclaimed behaviors or inclinations, then that's within the person. They make that claim. It can't be independently verified. And
well, but that's very debatable. You talk to LGBT people, they will say this is as much of their essence as any other part of them. But the bigger question becomes this: how does this hurt you? Saying that all people have an equal right to marry whom they love, how does this hurt you that it's fueling this outrage among conservatives and Christians?
Chris, I have confined my debate to this thing to the Constitution and the rule of law. And I've been through this in the past. I sued Governor Vilsack in Iowa successfully on a separation of powers issue that was very similar to this. We went through this in Iowa. Now we have it at the federal level. I'm one of the authors of the Iowa's Defense of Marriage Act. Here's how it is. The Constitution does not provide a right to marriage. Even though the Supreme Court says it does not. And if the Congress decided to pass such a law that it mirrored what the Supreme Court has, I think, wrongfully ordered last Friday, it'd be found unconstitutional because we don't have the authority in Congress to impose same-sex marriage on all the states and all the people within them. But if states should make those decisions within their legislatures, they do have the constitutional right to pass same-sex marriage within the states, and they have the right to recognize reciprocity. This needs to follow a process, a due process. The people in America have a right to due process, too. 5 black-robed judges deciding to transform America's society at their whim is the wrong thing to do, especially when 2 of them were conducting same-sex marriages in their spare time.
But often, the idea of identifying a right and what is popular are very different. Although, there may be more of a confluence here than you're suggesting, because the recent polls has it like 60-30 that people are in favor of same-sex marriage. But let's pick it up another day as we see more of the reaction. Representative King, always a pleasure to get your perspective on New Day, sir.
Thank you, Chris. The Supreme Court should not be looking at polls.
I understand. I was making the point about its popularity. Thank you, though, sir. Michaela.